The train screeched to a halt at the dusty Tonopah, Nevada station, and Katherine Sutton gripped her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles turned white as she stepped onto the wooden platform into the harsh afternoon sun of 1882. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston, each mile taking her further from everything she had ever known and closer to a man she had never met. The correspondence between them had been brief, practical, almost cold in its efficiency. Samuel Dawson, rancher, 30 years old, seeking a wife. Katherine Sutton, seamstress, 22 years old, seeking a new life far from the scandal that had destroyed her reputation through no fault of her own. Her former employer's son had attempted to force himself upon her, and when she had fought back and escaped, he had spread vicious lies about her character. No respectable household in Boston would employ her after that, and marriage prospects had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The platform was nearly empty save for an elderly man loading crates onto a wagon and a woman in a faded calico dress hurrying past with 2 small children in tow. Katherine stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? What if the letters had been some cruel joke? What if he was nothing like his words had suggested? The Nevada heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, so different from the coastal dampness of Massachusetts. Sweat trickled down her spine beneath her traveling dress, which suddenly felt entirely too heavy and restrictive. She set down her bag and pressed a gloved hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The train behind her hissed and groaned, preparing for its departure, and the sound made her jump. "Miss Sutton," the voice was low, rough around the edges but surprisingly gentle. Katherine spun around and found herself looking up into the most startling pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his simple cotton shirt, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent his days under the open sky. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, and despite his imposing height, there was something almost hesitant in his posture. Yes, Katherine managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel Dawson's face softened into a smile, and some of the tension in Katherine's chest eased slightly. "I am Samuel Dawson. I hope your journey was not too difficult." His eyes swept over her face, not with the predatory assessment she had feared, but with something that looked almost like wonder. "It was long," Katherine admitted. "Very long." They stood there for a moment, simply looking at each other, 2 strangers bound by letters and desperation and hope. The train whistle blew, making Katherine flinch again, and Samuel stepped closer instinctively, as if to shield her from the noise. "You are home," he said quietly, and the words settled over Katherine like a warm blanket on a cold night. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately that tears pricked at her eyes and she had to look away to compose herself. Home. The word seemed foreign, impossible. How could this strange, dusty town in the middle of nowhere be home? How could this man she did not know offer her something that had been denied to her for so long? "I brought the wagon," Samuel said, gesturing toward a sturdy vehicle hitched to 2 horses at the edge of the platform. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. If you are too tired, we can stay at the boarding house tonight and head out in the morning." Katherine shook her head quickly. The thought of delaying the inevitable made her anxiety worse, not better. "No, I would prefer to go now if that is acceptable." "Of course." Samuel picked up her carpetbag before she could protest and carried it to the wagon with ease. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentle hand, his palm warm even through her glove, and then climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, Katherine stole glances at the man who was to be her husband. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. His hands on the reins were steady and capable, scarred and calloused from hard work. He caught her looking and offered another small smile. "I know this must all be very strange for you," he said. "Strange does not begin to describe it," Katherine replied honestly. "But I suppose it is strange for you as well." "A bit," Samuel admitted. "I have been alone on the ranch for 3 years now since my father passed. It will be good to have company again. It will be good to have a wife." The words sent a shiver through Katherine despite the heat. Wife. She would be his wife. The thought was both terrifying and oddly thrilling. In his letters, Samuel had been forthright about his expectations. He wanted a partner, someone to share the burden and the rewards of ranch life. He had promised to treat her with respect and kindness, to provide for her, to protect her. He had not mentioned love, and neither had she. Love was a luxury neither of them could afford. The road stretched out before them, cutting through scrubland dotted with sage and creosote bushes. In the distance, mountains rose against the impossibly blue sky, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. The landscape was so vast, so empty compared to the crowded streets of Boston, that Katherine felt simultaneously freed and exposed. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. Samuel's expression brightened. "It is not the biggest spread in the territory, but it is mine. About 800 acres, with good grazing and a reliable water source from the creek that runs through the eastern pasture. I run about 200 head of cattle, mostly Texas Longhorns, and a dozen horses. There is a house, nothing fancy, but it is solid and weatherproof. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a front room. A barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. I have been working to expand the herd, maybe add some sheep eventually." As he talked, his voice took on a note of pride that Katherine found touching. This was his dream, his life's work, and he was sharing it with her. The realization made her sit up a little straighter. Whatever else might happen, whatever challenges lay ahead, Samuel Dawson was offering her something precious, a place to belong. "You have neighbors nearby?" Katherine asked. "The closest ranch is about 5 miles south, belongs to a family named Morrison. Good people. Frank Morrison and his wife Clara have 4 children, all grown now except for the youngest. Then there is the Henley place to the west, and beyond that, you start getting into the mountains where the miners work. Tonopah has been growing since they found silver in the hills, which means more business for ranchers like me. The miners need beef." Katherine nodded, trying to absorb all this information. The life he was describing was so far removed from her experience that she could barely imagine it. She had spent her entire life in the city, surrounded by buildings and people, with the ocean always nearby. This vast, dry emptiness was like another world entirely. "What about you?" Samuel asked, glancing at her. "Your letters did not say much about your family." Katherine stiffened. She had been careful in her letters to reveal only what was necessary. "There is not much to tell. My parents died of fever when I was 16. I went to work as a seamstress for various households. I have no siblings, no other family to speak of." It was the truth, if not the whole truth. Samuel seemed to sense there was more to the story, but he did not press, for which Katherine was grateful. The shame of what had happened still burned hot in her chest whenever she thought of it. The lies that had been told about her, the way former friends had turned away, the hungry looks from men who now believed her to be something she was not. "I am sorry for your loss," Samuel said quietly. "Losing your parents so young must have been difficult." "It was," Katherine admitted. "But I managed. I am stronger than I look." "I believe that," Samuel said, and something in his tone made Katherine look at him sharply. His expression was serious now, his gray eyes steady on the road ahead. It takes strength to travel across the country to marry a stranger. It takes courage to start over somewhere new. I want you to know that I see that, Katherine. I respect it. Unexpected emotion welled up in Katherine's throat. When was the last time anyone had spoken to her with such respect? When had anyone acknowledged her strength rather than her supposed weakness or wickedness? "Thank you," she managed. They rode in more comfortable silence for a while, the wagon rocking gently over the rutted road. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Despite her exhaustion and anxiety, Katherine found herself noticing the stark beauty of her surroundings. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. Wildflowers bloomed in unexpected patches of color among the sage. The air smelled of dust and sun-warmed earth, and something sharp and clean that she would later learn was juniper. "There," Samuel said, pointing ahead. "That is home." Katherine followed his gesture and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. The house was simple but well-maintained, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray. A covered porch ran along the front, and windows reflected the afternoon light. Behind it stood a large barn, a smaller outbuilding, and various corrals. Trees grew near the house, their leaves a welcome splash of green, and Katherine could hear the sound of running water even from a distance. As they drew closer, she noticed more details. Curtains in the windows, though they looked faded and old. A vegetable garden near the house, though it was clearly struggling and overgrown with weeds. Chickens scratching in the yard. Everything had the air of a place that had been maintained by a single man doing his best, but lacking a woman's touch. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Katherine descend. His hands on her waist were brief and proper, but Katherine felt the warmth of them through her dress. Her feet touched solid ground and she swayed slightly, light-headed from the long journey and the weight of this moment. "Let me show you inside," Samuel said, retrieving her bag. He led her up the porch steps and opened the door, stepping aside to let her enter first. The interior was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Katherine's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the front room with its simple furniture, the stone fireplace, the wooden floor covered here and there with braided rugs. Everything was clean but sparse, functional rather than decorative. Through a doorway she could see into the kitchen, and another door led to what must be the bedrooms. "I know it is not much," Samuel said, and Katherine heard the uncertainty in his voice. She turned to face him. "It is more than I had in Boston," she said honestly. "I was living in a single room barely bigger than a closet. This is very nice, Samuel." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "I am glad you think so. I had the bedroom on the right prepared for you. The one on the left is mine. I thought you might want your own space at least at first. Until you feel more comfortable." Katherine's cheeks flushed as she understood his meaning. They were to be married, but he was not expecting immediate intimacy. The relief she felt was profound. "That is very considerate of you." "I want you to feel safe here," Samuel said, meeting her eyes. "I want you to feel like this is truly your home, not just a place you ended up. That might take time, and I am willing to give you that time." Katherine set her reticule down on a nearby table and took a deep breath. This man, this stranger, was showing her more kindness than anyone in Boston had in the past year. She thought of the desperation that had driven her to answer his advertisement, the feeling of having nowhere else to turn. And now here she stood, in a house that could become a home, with a man who seemed genuinely decent. "When were you thinking we should marry?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought we might go into town in a few days, give you time to settle in first. The circuit preacher should be back through Tonopah by the end of the week. But if you would rather wait longer, or if you want to go sooner, we can arrange that too." "A few days sounds reasonable," Katherine said. It seemed both impossibly soon and unbearably far away. Once they married, there would be no going back. But where would she go back to? What did she have to return to? Samuel showed her through the house, pointing out where things were kept, explaining the daily routines. The kitchen had a good stove and a hand pump for water, which he explained drew from the well behind the house. The bedrooms were small but adequate, each with a bed, a dresser, and a window. Her room had clearly been prepared with care. The bed was made up with clean linens, and there were fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "I was not sure what you would need," Samuel said, hovering in the doorway. "Clara Morrison helped me get some things ready. She was very excited to hear I was bringing a bride home. She said she would come by to visit once you had time to settle." "That was kind of her," Katherine said, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. It was worn but beautiful, made of carefully pieced squares in various shades of blue and cream. "That was my mother's," Samuel said softly. "She made it the year before she died. I thought you might like it." Katherine's throat tightened. "It is beautiful. I will take good care of it." Samuel nodded and backed out of the doorway. "I will let you rest and freshen up. I need to see to the evening chores. There is water in the pitcher and fresh towels in the dresser. Take your time. I will start something for supper in an hour or so." After he left, Katherine sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to release the tension she had been holding all day. Her hands shook as she removed her gloves and unpinned her hat. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had traveled across the country and was now sitting in the house of the man who would become her husband in a matter of days. The reality of it hit her all at once, and she found herself laughing, though the sound was perilously close to tears. What was she doing? What had she been thinking? She was a seamstress from Boston who knew nothing about ranching or life in the West. She could barely ride a horse, knew nothing about caring for cattle, had never cooked over a wood stove or drawn water from a well or any of 100 other skills she would surely need. But Samuel had said she was home. He had looked at her with those steady gray eyes and promised her safety and respect. That had to be worth something. That had to be enough to build on. Katherine stood and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, washing away the grime of travel. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her toiletries on the dresser. When she looked out the window, she could see Samuel in the distance, walking toward the barn. Even from here, she could see the easy confidence of his movements, the way he belonged to this land in a way she could not yet imagine belonging. But she would learn. She had to learn. There was no alternative. By the time Katherine ventured out of her room, the smell of cooking meat and coffee filled the house. She found Samuel in the kitchen, standing over the stove with a practiced ease that surprised her. He had changed out of his better shirt into an older one, and his sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "I hope you like steak," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "It is what I know how to cook best, that and beans and biscuits." "It smells wonderful," Katherine said honestly. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had barely eaten all day. "Sit down," Samuel said, nodding toward the table. "It will be ready in just a moment." Katherine sat and watched as he moved efficiently around the kitchen, plating food and pouring coffee. When he set the meal before her, she was impressed despite herself. The steak was perfectly cooked, the beans were savory, and the biscuits were golden and flaky. "This is very good," she said after her first bite. Samuel looked pleased. "My mother made sure I could take care of myself. She said no man should be helpless in his own kitchen, though I will admit my cooking is pretty simple. I am sure you will do much better once you get the hang of the stove." They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Katherine found herself relaxing incrementally. This was strange, certainly, but it was not unpleasant. Samuel was not what she had feared. He was quiet but not cold, respectful but not distant. When he spoke, it was with genuine interest. "I was thinking," he said as they finished eating, "that tomorrow I could show you around the property, introduce you to the animals, give you a sense of how things work around here. The day after, if you are up for it, we could ride into town and you could meet some of the neighbors, see where the shops are, get you some fabric and supplies for whatever you might need." "I would like that," Katherine said. The thought of learning the rhythms of this new life was less daunting than sitting idle with her anxious thoughts. "And I thought you should know," Samuel continued, his voice careful, "that you do not have to be afraid of me. I know you do not know me, and you have no reason to trust me yet. But I meant what I said in my letters. I am looking for a partner, not a servant. I want a wife who feels like she has a say in things, who feels like this ranch belongs to her as much as it does to me. I know that might sound strange, but it is how I was raised. My parents worked together in everything. My mother was as much a part of building this place as my father was." Katherine looked down at her plate, overwhelmed by the earnestness in his voice. "In Boston, after what happened to me, men looked at me like I was somehow less than human. Like I was an object to be used or discarded. The way you speak to me, the way you look at me, it is so different. I am not sure how to understand it yet." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious. "You do not have to tell me what happened if you do not want to. But I can guess that someone hurt you or tried to, and that you suffered for it in ways you should not have. That is not right, Katherine. None of that was your fault, whatever people said. And I want you to know that here on this ranch, you are safe. You are valued. You are seen as exactly what you are, a brave, strong woman who deserves respect and kindness." Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped at them hastily, embarrassed by the sudden show of emotion, but Samuel just handed her a clean handkerchief without comment, giving her space to compose herself. "I am sorry," she said, her voice thick. "I did not mean to cry." "Do not apologize," Samuel said gently. "You have been through a lot these past few days. Crying is nothing to be ashamed of." They cleaned up the kitchen together, Samuel showing Katherine where everything was kept, and then he excused himself to finish the evening chores. Katherine wandered out onto the porch and sat in one of the wooden rocking chairs, watching the sun complete its descent. The sky put on a spectacular show, blazing with oranges and pinks and purples, before fading to a deep blue studded with stars. She had never seen so many stars. In Boston, the city lights obscured all but the brightest, but here they filled the sky from horizon to horizon, a river of light flowing overhead. The sight was so beautiful it made her chest ache. Samuel returned as full darkness fell, and they sat together on the porch for a while, not speaking much, just existing in the same space. Katherine found it surprisingly comfortable. She had expected awkwardness, tension, the horrible stilted interaction of two people forced together by circumstance. But Samuel seemed content to simply be, not demanding conversation or attention, and Katherine was grateful for it. "I should turn in," she said eventually, standing and smoothing her skirts. "Tomorrow will be a long day, I imagine." "Sleep well," Samuel said, rising as well. "If you need anything during the night, I am just next door." In her room, Katherine changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. The bed was comfortable, the pillows soft, and the quilt that had belonged to Samuel's mother was warm without being too heavy. Through the window, she could still see the stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She had expected to lie awake for hours, her mind churning with anxiety, but exhaustion claimed her quickly. Her last thought before sleep was of Samuel's words, "You are home." The next morning, Katherine woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and light streaming through her window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure of where she was, but then memory returned, and with it a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She dressed quickly in her oldest dress, knowing that she would be outside touring the ranch. When she emerged from her room, she found fresh coffee on the stove and a plate of biscuits covered with a clean cloth. A note in simple handwriting said he was in the barn and to come out when she was ready. Katherine ate quickly, tied her hair back with a ribbon, and ventured outside. The morning air was cool and fresh, still holding the night's chill, though she knew it would heat up quickly. She found Samuel in the barn, mucking out stalls, and he looked up with a smile when she entered. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I did not wake you too early with all the noise out here." "No, I needed to get up anyway," Katherine said, looking around the barn with interest. It was larger than she had realized, with multiple stalls for horses, a tack room, and a loft above full of hay. "Let me finish up here and then I will give you the full tour," Samuel said, returning to his work with the pitchfork. Katherine watched him work, noting the smooth efficiency of his movements. He was clearly a man who had spent his life doing physical labor, and his body showed it. When he finished and turned to her, wiping sweat from his brow with his shirt sleeve, Katherine felt an unexpected flutter of attraction. She pushed it aside, confused by the feeling. This was a practical arrangement, not a love match. "Come on," Samuel said, gesturing for her to follow him. "I will introduce you to everyone." He showed her the horses first, beautiful animals with intelligent eyes and glossy coats. He introduced each one by name, explaining their personalities and quirks. There was Thunder, his own riding horse, a big bay gelding with a white star on his forehead. Maple, a gentle chestnut mare. Scout, a young paint horse Samuel was training. Dancer, an aging gray mare who had belonged to his mother. "I thought you might like to ride Maple," Samuel said, stroking the mare's nose. "She is the gentlest of the bunch, very patient. Good for someone still learning to ride." "I should tell you," Katherine said hesitantly, "I have only ridden a horse twice in my life, and both times were less than successful." Samuel's expression did not show judgment, only thoughtfulness. "Well then, we will take it slow. Riding is essential out here, but there is no rush. We will practice in the corral until you feel confident." He showed her the cattle next, grazing peacefully in the pasture. Katherine had to admit they were impressive animals, even if they did smell quite strong. Samuel explained how he rotated the herd through different pastures, how he checked them regularly for illness or injury, how the calves were born in the spring. "It is a lot of work," he admitted, "especially for one person. Having help will make a real difference." "I want to help," Katherine said. "I am not sure what I can do yet, but I want to be useful." "You will be," Samuel assured her. "Just learning the lay of the land and how things work is the first step." They walked the property for hours, Samuel pointing out landmarks and boundaries, showing her the creek that provided water, explaining how the ranch operated. Katherine asked questions whenever something was unclear, and Samuel answered patiently, never making her feel foolish for not knowing. By the time they returned to the house for lunch, Katherine's feet ached and her skin felt tight from the sun, but she also felt something else, a sense of possibility. This life was foreign to her, certainly, but it was not beyond her grasp. She could learn these things. She could become part of this place. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Samuel was up before dawn to tend the animals, and Katherine began rising with him, learning to cook breakfast while he worked. They spent the mornings together, with Samuel teaching her about ranch tasks and Katherine practicing her riding in the corral. The afternoons were often spent apart, Samuel working on various repairs and maintenance, while Katherine worked on improving the neglected vegetable garden and mending clothes that had gone too long without proper care. The evenings were Katherine's favorite time. They would cook dinner together, Samuel doing the heavy work while Katherine learned the quirks of the stove and experimented with the limited ingredients available. Then they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking. These conversations were where Katherine began to truly know Samuel and he her. She learned that he had always loved ranching, even as a boy, that he missed his parents deeply, but had made peace with their deaths, that he read extensively, with a small library in his bedroom containing everything from agricultural manuals to novels by Charles Dickens, that he played the harmonica, though not very well, and that he had a strong sense of justice that had sometimes gotten him into trouble when he witnessed wrongdoing. In turn, Katherine found herself sharing more than she had planned. She told him about her childhood, about how her father had been a clerk and her mother a music teacher, about how they had instilled in her a love of learning despite their modest means. She told him about her work as a seamstress, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her hands, and eventually, haltingly, she told him about what had happened with her employer's son. His name was Richard Carlyle, she said one evening, the words coming slowly. He was 25, handsome, charming when he wanted to be. I was working for his family, doing alterations and making new clothes for his mother and sisters. He started paying attention to me, complimenting me, finding excuses to be in the room where I was working. I was flattered at first, foolish enough to think his interest might be genuine. But then one day when no one else was home, he cornered me in the sewing room and tried to force himself on me. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. I fought him off, Katherine continued. I scratched his face and hit him with a heavy bolt of fabric and ran. I thought that would be the end of it, that he would be too ashamed to speak of it. But instead, he told everyone that I had tried to seduce him, that I had thrown myself at him and became violent when he rejected me. His family believed him, of course. Why would they not? He was their son and I was just the seamstress. Word spread quickly. Within days, I lost all my clients. Other men started approaching me on the street, making crude propositions, thinking I was available for hire. I could not find work, could barely afford my room. That is when I saw your advertisement. I am sorry, Samuel said quietly. I am sorry that happened to you, and I am sorry the world believed his lies instead of your truth. If I ever meet Richard Carlyle, I cannot promise to act like a gentleman. Despite the seriousness of the moment, Katherine felt a smile tug at her lips. I would not want you to make such a promise. He deserves to be knocked down a few pegs. What you did took incredible courage, Samuel said, turning to face her fully. Fighting back against someone with more power than you, standing up for yourself even when it cost you everything, that is the mark of real strength. I am glad you found your way here, Katherine. I am glad I have the chance to know you. Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. I am glad too, she said softly. The day finally came to ride into town for their wedding. Katherine dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple but elegant gray cotton with white trim, and pinned her hair up neatly. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who looked both nervous and determined. By the end of this day, she would be Katherine Dawson, wife of a Nevada rancher, tied permanently to this new life. Samuel helped her up onto the wagon seat, and they made the journey into Tonopah in comfortable silence. Katherine watched the landscape roll past, now slightly more familiar than it had been just days ago. She could identify landmarks Samuel had pointed out, recognize the turn that led to the Morrison Ranch, spot the mountains in the distance where the silver mines operated. Tonopah was busy when they arrived, with wagons and horses crowding the main street and people going about their business. Samuel pulled up in front of a white building with a simple cross on the door, and Katherine's heart began to pound. "Are you ready?" Samuel asked gently. Katherine took a deep breath. Yes, I think I am." The circuit preacher was a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, who asked them to stand before him in the small church and join hands. Katherine's hand trembled as Samuel took it in his grip warm and steady. The preacher spoke about marriage, about partnership and commitment and faith, and then asked them to exchange their vows. Samuel went first, his voice clear and certain. "I, Samuel Dawson, take you, Katherine Sutton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, to stand beside you in all things. I promise to treat you with respect and kindness, to value your thoughts and opinions, to build a life with you based on honesty and mutual support, for as long as we both shall live." Katherine blinked back tears as she recited her own vows, promising to be a faithful and supportive wife, to work alongside him, to share in the joys and burdens of their life together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief and chaste but significant nonetheless. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, it was done. Katherine Sutton had ceased to exist, replaced by Katherine Dawson. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. After the ceremony, Samuel took Katherine to the general store and told her to pick out whatever she needed. Katherine, who had lived frugally for so long, was overwhelmed by the gesture. "Samuel, I do not need much," she protested. "Katherine, you are my wife now," Samuel said firmly but kindly. "What I have is yours. Please, get what you need to feel at home. Fabric for new dresses, supplies for the kitchen, whatever would make you happy." Eventually, Katherine allowed herself to select several lengths of fabric, new thread and needles, a few household items that were missing from the ranch, and a packet of seeds for the garden. Samuel added several other items without consulting her, including a new leather-bound journal and a set of pencils. "For writing," he explained when she looked at him questioningly. "You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal when you were younger. I thought you might enjoy having one again." The thoughtfulness of the gesture made Katherine's throat tight. When had anyone last paid such attention to her words, remembered such a small detail? As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a woman's voice called out. "Samuel Dawson, is that you?" A woman in her 40s with a round, friendly face and graying brown hair approached, her expression delighted. Behind her trailed a girl of about 17 with similar features. "Clara," Samuel said warmly, moving to greet her. "Perfect timing. I wanted you to meet Katherine. Katherine, this is Clara Morrison, our neighbor to the south, and her daughter Emma." "Oh, we are so pleased to meet you," Clara said, clasping Katherine's hands in hers. "Samuel told us you were coming, and we have been so excited. It is wonderful to have another woman nearby. We are not so terribly isolated out here, but female company is always precious." Emma smiled shyly at Katherine. "Father said we could visit once you had settled in. I hope that is all right. It gets lonely with just the family sometimes." "I would love that," Katherine said honestly. "I was worried about being so far from town with no other women to talk to." "Well, worry no more," Clara said decisively. "We will arrange a proper visit soon, And you must come to Sunday dinner this week. Both of you, I insist." They chatted for a few more minutes before parting, and Katherine felt lighter as they headed back to the ranch. She had a friend, or at least the beginning of one. She was not as alone as she had feared. The ride home passed quickly, and as the ranch came into view, Katherine was surprised to realize that it did feel like home now, at least a little. The house looked welcoming rather than strange, the landscape familiar rather than alien. Samuel helped her down from the wagon and carried their purchases inside. As he set them on the kitchen table, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I know this is our wedding night," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "But I meant what I said about giving you time. I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We are married in the eyes of the law and God, but what happens between us privately can move at whatever pace you need." Katherine studied him for a long moment. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had offered her safety when she had nowhere else to turn, who had married her despite knowing the scandal that surrounded her name. She thought about the gentle way he had kissed her in the church, the thoughtfulness of his gifts, the patience he had shown in teaching her about ranch life. "Samuel," she said softly, "I am not afraid of you. I want you to know that. What happened to me in Boston, that was about power and cruelty. What we have, it is different. I may not be ready for everything yet, but I am not afraid." Something in Samuel's expression softened. "I am glad," he said. "That matters to me more than you might realize." They spent the evening as they had spent the others, cooking dinner together and sitting on the porch as the stars came out. But there was something different now, a new awareness between them. They were husband and wife. Their lives were joined. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Over the following weeks, Katherine threw herself into learning her new role. Clara Morrison proved to be an invaluable friend and teacher, visiting regularly and showing Katherine the skills she would need to thrive. How to preserve food for the winter, how to make soap and candles, how to handle the heavy cast iron pots on the wood stove. Emma often came along, and the younger woman's enthusiasm was infectious. Katherine also worked on improving the house, sewing new curtains for the windows and making cushions for the wooden chairs. She planted the seeds she had bought, coaxing the garden back to productive life with careful watering and weeding. The chickens began to recognize her and would follow her around the yard, clucking hopefully whenever she appeared. Her riding improved steadily under Samuel's patient instruction. At first, she could barely stay in the saddle while Maple walked in slow circles around the corral, but gradually she gained confidence. The day she managed to trot without losing her balance, Samuel cheered like she had accomplished something miraculous. "You are a natural," he said, grinning up at her. "I am hardly that," Katherine laughed, but she was pleased nonetheless. Samuel continued to surprise her with his consideration. He noticed when she was tired and insisted she rest. He complimented her cooking even when it was barely edible. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answers. Slowly, Katherine began to understand that this was simply who he was, not an act he was putting on to win her over. She also began to notice other things about him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The deep, rumbling quality of his laugh. The strength in his hands when he helped her down from a horse or reached for the same dish she was reaching for at dinner. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, with an expression of such tenderness it made her breath catch. One evening about 6 weeks after their wedding, Katherine was in her room preparing for bed when she heard Samuel playing his harmonica on the porch. The tune was simple and a bit rough, but there was something melancholy and sweet about it. Without really thinking about what she was doing, Katherine went to her door and opened it. Samuel's bedroom door was also open, and she could see through to where he sat in a chair by the window, the instrument raised to his lips. He looked up when she appeared and lowered the harmonica. "I am sorry," he said. "Was I keeping you awake?" "No," Katherine said. "I liked it. I did not know you played so often." "Usually I am outside so it does not bother anyone," Samuel said. "I find it calming after a long day." They looked at each other across the space between their rooms, and something unspoken passed between them. Katherine thought about the separate bedrooms, the careful distance they had maintained. She thought about how safe Samuel made her feel, how respected, how valued. She thought about the way her heart had begun to speed up whenever he smiled at her, the way she had started looking forward to their evenings together with an eagerness that went beyond simple companionship. "Samuel," she said quietly, "you have been very patient with me." "I told you I would be," he replied, setting the harmonica aside. "I know, and I am grateful, but I think I am ready for us to be husband and wife in truth, if you still want that." Samuel stood slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am certain," Katherine said, and she was. "I trust you, Samuel. I think I am beginning to feel more than trust." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, and then his hands were cupping her face, gentle despite their calluses, and he was kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Katherine kissed him back, tentative at first and then with growing confidence, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I have been hoping you would say that," he admitted. "I have been falling for you since the day you stepped off that train, Katherine. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." "I am falling for you too," Katherine whispered. "I did not think I would ever trust a man again, but you showed me I was wrong. You showed me what a good man can be." That night, they came together with a gentleness and care that erased the last of Katherine's fears. Samuel was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable, stopping whenever she tensed to ask if she was all right. By the time they finally lay together in his bed, tangled in each other's arms, Katherine felt changed in a way that had nothing to do with physical intimacy and everything to do with emotional connection. "I love you," Samuel said against her hair. "I love you too," Katherine replied, and meant it with her whole heart. After that night, their relationship deepened in ways Katherine had not imagined possible. They moved Katherine's things into Samuel's room, transforming it into their shared space. The ranch began to feel not just like home but like their home, a place they were building together. Katherine's skills improved steadily. She became proficient at riding and started accompanying Samuel when he checked the herd. She learned to recognize signs of illness in the animals and how to treat minor injuries. Her garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table and extras to trade in town. She began taking and sewing work from other ranchers' wives, earning a bit of money of her own and building friendships throughout the community. The Morrisons became like family, with Sunday dinners alternating between the 2 ranches. Emma and Katherine grew especially close, and Katherine found herself in the unexpected role of older sister, offering advice on everything from cooking to dealing with the young men who were starting to court Emma. Samuel's love for Katherine seemed to grow deeper with each passing day. He brought her wildflowers for no reason, listened to her read aloud from books in the evening, held her close at night, and whispered how grateful he was that she had come into his life. Katherine, who had spent so long feeling unwanted and judged, bloomed under his affection like the roses she planted near the porch. One afternoon in early autumn, about 5 months after their wedding, Katherine was working in the garden when a wave of nausea hit her so strongly she had to sit down abruptly. Clara, who had stopped by for tea, noticed immediately. "Katherine, are you all right?" she asked, hurrying over. "I am fine," Katherine said, though she felt decidedly not fine. "Just dizzy for a moment." Clara studied her with an experienced eye. "When was your last monthly time?" Katherine opened her mouth to answer and then stopped, counting back in her head. Her eyes widened as she realized it had been over 2 months. "Oh," she breathed. Clara smiled knowingly. "I think you might want to talk to Samuel soon. Unless I am very much mistaken, you are going to have a baby." The confirmation from the doctor in Tonopah a week later sent Katherine into a whirlwind of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. What did she know about being a mother? What if she did something wrong? What if the baby did not survive? Infant mortality was common, especially out on isolated ranches far from medical care. Samuel's reaction was unequivocal delight. When Katherine told him, sitting on their bed with her hands twisting nervously in her lap, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Katherine, this is the best news I could ever have imagined." "You are not worried?" Katherine asked. "About all the things that could go wrong?" "Of course I am worried," Samuel said honestly, "but I am more excited than worried. We will do everything we can to keep both you and the baby safe and healthy. And we have Clara and the other ranch wives nearby who have been through this before. You are not alone in this, Katherine. You will never be alone." His words eased some of her anxiety, and as the weeks passed and her pregnancy progressed, Katherine found herself becoming genuinely excited. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, working by lamplight in the evenings while Samuel read aloud to her. They converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from smooth pine. Clara and the other ranch wives threw Katherine a gathering to celebrate the coming baby, bringing gifts and advice in equal measure. Katherine was overwhelmed by the generosity of these women who had been strangers less than a year ago and were now dear friends. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Katherine's belly swelled, and Samuel became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer chores. Katherine found it both touching and exasperating. "Samuel, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," he said, taking the basket anyway, "but humor me, I worry about you." "I know you do," Katherine said, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek, "and I love you for it." The baby came in late March of 1883, born during a spring storm that rattled the windows and drummed rain on the roof. Clara was there, having moved into the ranch a week before to help with the birth, and her calm, experienced presence was invaluable. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine was certain she could not endure another contraction. But Clara coached her through, and Samuel held her hand, his face pale but his grip steady. And finally, after 20 hours of labor, their son came into the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Clara announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket and placing him in Katherine's arms. "A big, healthy boy." Katherine looked down at the tiny face, at the shock of dark hair and the eyes that were struggling to open, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her son, hers and Samuel's. "He is perfect," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Katherine, he is absolutely perfect. You are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." They named him William Thomas Dawson, William after Samuel's father and Thomas after Katherine's. Little William was a content baby who nursed well and slept in reasonably long stretches, much to Katherine's relief. Samuel was a devoted father from the first moment, taking every opportunity to hold his son, speaking to him in a soft, gentle voice that made Katherine fall even more deeply in love with her husband. The ranch continued to thrive. With Katherine's help, Samuel was able to expand the herd and improve the property. They hired a young man named David to help with the heavier work, giving Samuel more time to spend with his family. Katherine took on more sewing work, and her reputation as a skilled seamstress spread throughout the territory. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts that made water scarce, hard winters that tested their resourcefulness, illnesses that had to be nursed through. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew stronger through adversity. When William was 2 years old, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter, Rose Clara Dawson, was born on a bright October morning, arriving quickly and without complication. She had Katherine's dark hair and Samuel's gray eyes, and William was entranced by his baby sister. Emma Morrison married a young rancher named Thomas Parker when she was 19, and Katherine was honored to help make her wedding dress. The two families remained close, their children growing up together, spending long summer days playing in the creek and helping with ranch chores. As the years passed, Katherine sometimes thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Tonopah, alone and uncertain. She could hardly recognize herself in that person anymore. She had become strong and confident, a skilled rancher's wife, a devoted mother, a valued member of her community. She had built a life she was proud of, filled with love and purpose. One evening, when William was 7 and Rose was 5, Katherine and Samuel sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. The children were asleep inside, worn out from a day of helping brand the new calves. Samuel had his arm around Katherine's shoulders, and she was leaning into his warmth. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked suddenly. "Leaving Boston, coming here, marrying a stranger?" Katherine turned to look at him, taking in the face that was as familiar to her now as her own. The gray eyes that crinkled at the corners, the smile lines around his mouth, the sun-weathered skin. This man who had shown her what love could be, who had given her a home and a family and a life beyond anything she had imagined. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. That day I stepped off the train, I was so scared I could barely breathe. But you were there, and you said you are home, and Samuel, you were right. This is home. You are home. All of this, it is everything I never knew I was looking for." Samuel kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that tasted of love and contentment and shared history. "I am the lucky one," he said against her lips. "You saved me, Katherine. I did not even know how lonely I was until you arrived and filled my life with light." "We saved each other," Katherine corrected. "That is what love does." They sat together until the stars came out, watching the land they had built together fade into shadow. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, the horses nickered softly to each other. Out in the pasture, the cattle grazed peacefully. And on the porch, Katherine and Samuel held each other, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place, this life, this love. The years continued to roll by in a gentle rhythm of seasons and growth. William grew tall and strong, showing an early aptitude for working with horses that made Samuel burst with pride. Rose was clever and curious, always asking questions and demanding to know how things worked. Katherine taught her daughter to read and write, passing on the love of learning her own parents had instilled in her. When Katherine was 32, she became pregnant for the 3rd time. The pregnancy was harder than the previous 2 had been, and Dr. Hayes warned her that she was not as young as she had been and should take care. Samuel hovered even more than he had with the first 2, and Katherine allowed it, secretly grateful for his attention even as she teased him about it. Their second son, James Robert Dawson, was born in the spring of 1892, a full 10 years after Katherine had first arrived in Nevada. He was smaller than William had been, but healthy, with a shock of red-gold hair that must have come from some distant ancestor on Katherine's side. "We have a full house now," Samuel said, gazing down at his newest son with wonder. "3 children. Can you believe it?" "Sometimes I still cannot believe any of this," Katherine admitted, "but I am so grateful it is real." Life with 3 children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Katherine's days were filled with cooking, cleaning, sewing, gardening, helping with ranch work, and caring for her family. But she would not have traded it for anything. When she thought back to her life in Boston, to the small, cold room and the endless work and the loneliness, it seemed like a different lifetime. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher spread, and he was often consulted by other ranchers in the territory. Katherine's sewing business grew to the point where she had to turn down work, focusing only on special projects for close friends. When William turned 16, Samuel began officially training him to take over the ranch someday. The boy took to it naturally, and Samuel would often come in for dinner talking proudly about something William had done or observed. Rose showed no interest in ranching but was fascinated by medicine, and Katherine arranged for her to spend time with Dr. Hayes whenever he was in the area, learning what she could. James was still young, more interested in playing and exploring than any serious pursuits, but he showed signs of having inherited both his mother's creativity and his father's steady temperament. He loved to listen to Katherine read and would spend hours drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. The Morrison family remained close friends. Emma and her husband Thomas had 4 children of their own, and the 2 families gathered often for meals and celebrations. Frank and Clara Morrison grew older but remained active, and Clara continued to be Katherine's closest confidante and friend. One afternoon in the summer of 1896, Katherine was hanging laundry when she saw a stranger riding up to the ranch. She called for Samuel, who emerged from the barn and greeted the rider, a young man of about 20 with a travel-worn appearance. "Excuse me," the young man said. "I am looking for Mrs. Katherine Dawson. I was told she lives here." "I am Katherine Dawson," Katherine said, coming forward. "How can I help you?" The young man dismounted and removed his hat. "My name is David Carlyle. I believe you knew my brother, Richard Carlyle, in Boston." Katherine felt as if she had been doused with cold water. Samuel immediately moved to her side, his hand finding hers. "What do you want?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I wanted to apologize," David Carlyle said, his expression earnest. "I was only 12 when what happened between you and Richard occurred, but as I got older I started asking questions. I learned the truth about what my brother did, about the lies he told. Our parents refused to believe it, but our sister eventually told me everything. She had known all along that Richard was lying, but she was too afraid to speak up against him." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded paper. "Richard died 3 years ago. Consumption. Before he died, he confessed to what he had done, to the lies he had told. Our sister wrote it all down and had it witnessed and notarized. I thought you deserved to have it, to have proof that you were telling the truth all along. It is too late to undo the damage, but I wanted you to know that at least some of us believe you and are sorry for what happened." Katherine took the paper with shaking hands. She unfolded it and read Richard Carlyle's confession, his admission that he had tried to force himself on her and had lied when she fought him off, ruining her reputation to save his own. It was all there in black and white, witnessed and signed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means more than you might realize." "I am glad I could bring it to you," David said. "I can see that you have made a good life for yourself here. I am happy for that. Not all of my family was like Richard. I hope you can believe that." After David Carlyle rode away, Katherine stood holding the paper, tears streaming down her face. Samuel wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," Katherine said, and realized it was true. "I think I needed this. Not the vindication so much, although that is something, but the closure. Knowing that the truth came out eventually, that Richard had to face what he did, even if it was only at the end. It feels like the last piece of my old life has been put to rest." "That man had no power over who you became," Samuel said. "You did that yourself, but I am glad he can trouble you no more." Katherine folded the confession carefully and put it away in her dresser. She would keep it, but she would not dwell on it. That chapter of her life was closed. She had written new chapters, better ones, filled with love and family and purpose. As the century drew to a close, Katherine and Samuel watched their children grow into capable young adults. William, at 18, was essentially running the ranch alongside his father, and there was talk of him courting Emily Peters, the daughter of a rancher from the next county over. Rose, at 16, had announced her intention to go to nursing school in San Francisco, a decision that both thrilled and terrified Katherine. James, at 8, was showing signs of having his father's steady nature and his mother's artistic eye. Katherine was 40 years old now, with silver threading through her dark hair and fine lines at the corners of her eyes. But she felt more beautiful than she ever had in her youth, because Samuel looked at her with the same love and admiration he always had, seeing past the changes time had wrought to the woman beneath. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he told her on their 18th wedding anniversary, presenting her with a silver locket he had commissioned from a jeweler in Tonopah. Inside were tiny photographs of their 3 children, miracles of modern photography. Katherine clasped it around her neck, where it rested above her heart, and kissed her husband thoroughly. "I love you, Samuel Dawson," she said. "More today than yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." The years turned like pages in a book. William married Emily Peters in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, with half the territory in attendance. They built a house on the eastern section of the property, and within a year, they had given Samuel and Katherine their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel after his grandfather. Katherine cried the first time she held him, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family they had built. Rose went to nursing school in San Francisco and thrived there, writing home regularly about her studies and the fascinating city she now called home. She eventually married a doctor named Benjamin Cole and stayed in California, though she visited the ranch several times a year. James grew into a talented artist and writer, his work often published in various journals and magazines. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah, and they settled in Tonopah, where James opened a small bookshop, and Sarah taught at the local school. As Samuel and Katherine grew older, William and Emily took on more of the ranch's daily operations. Samuel remained active and involved, but he no longer worked from dawn to dusk. Instead, he spent more time with Katherine, the two of them taking long rides through the property they both loved, sitting on the porch watching their grandchildren play, simply enjoying each other's company after a lifetime spent building something beautiful together. Clara Morrison passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75, and Katherine mourned the loss of her dear friend deeply. Frank followed her less than a year later, and Katherine thought about how some loves were so intertwined that one could not long survive without the other. In the summer of 1910, Katherine and Samuel celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch was thriving under William's management, adding new innovations while maintaining the solid foundation Samuel and Katherine had built. Rose and her family had traveled from California for the occasion, and James and Sarah had closed the bookshop for the week to spend time at the ranch. They held a great outdoor feast, with tables laden with food and friends from all over the territory in attendance. As the sun began to set, Samuel stood and raised his glass. 28 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 60 years. I went to the train station in Tonopah to meet a woman I had never seen before. I was nervous and uncertain, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake with this whole mail-order bride business. But then Katherine stepped off that train, looking terrified and brave all at once, and I knew immediately that she was extraordinary. I told her she was home, and she trusted me enough to believe it might be true. Building this life with her has been the greatest privilege of my existence. To my wife, my partner, my love, thank you for choosing to stay. Katherine stood and kissed him to the applause and cheers of their family and friends. Thank you for giving me a home worth staying for, she whispered against his lips. As the celebration continued around them, Katherine looked out at everything they had built. The ranch that had been a lonely bachelor's dream was now a thriving family enterprise. The children they had raised had grown into good, capable adults. The love they had forged from necessity and hope had deepened into something unshakable and eternal. She thought about the scared young woman who had fled Boston with nothing but a carpetbag and a prayer. She thought about how close she had come to letting fear stop her from boarding that train. And she thought about how grateful she was that she had found the courage to step into the unknown. Samuel's arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and Katherine leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of sun and leather and home. The sky above them was turning orange and pink, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the rising moon. Life had not always been easy. There had been struggles and losses, difficult years and heartbreaking moments. But through it all, they had had each other, and that had made all the difference. As the years continued to unfold, Samuel and Katherine settled into a comfortable old age. They took daily walks around the property, Samuel's hand clasped firmly in Katherine's, pointing out changes and remembering moments from their shared history. They sat together on the porch each evening, watching the sun paint the Nevada sky in impossible colors, content in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other. Their grandchildren adored them. Young Samuel, now 10, loved to hear his grandfather's stories about the old days, about building the ranch from almost nothing and the challenges of frontier life. The younger grandchildren, 4 more between William and Emily's family and 2 more from James and Sarah, would climb into Katherine's lap and beg her to tell them about Boston, about the train ride west, about how she and their grandfather fell in love. "Tell us about when you first met, little Grace," William's youngest daughter would beg, her eyes wide and enchanted. And Katherine would tell them, her voice warm with memory, about stepping off the train into the blinding Nevada sun, about being so frightened she could barely breathe, about the tall cowboy with the kind gray eyes who had looked at her and said, "You are home." Was it love at first sight? Grace asked. Katherine smiled. "No, sweetheart. It was something better than that. It was trust at first sight. And trust, when you nurture it and protect it and build on it every day, grows into a love stronger than anything you can imagine." Samuel would reach over and take her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, and the children would giggle at their grandparents' affection. In the spring of 1915, Samuel became ill. It started as a bad cold that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia. Katherine nursed him devotedly, barely leaving his side, but his body was weakening with age and could not fight off the infection as it once would have. On a quiet April morning, with the sun streaming through the bedroom window and Katherine holding his hand, Samuel Dawson passed away peacefully at the age of 65. He had lived long enough to see his children succeed, to hold his grandchildren, to build a legacy that would last generations. And most importantly, he had loved and been loved by an extraordinary woman who had taken a chance on a stranger's promise of home. Katherine's grief was profound. They had shared 33 years of marriage, built a life and a family together, weathered every storm side by side. The ranch felt empty without him, the porch too quiet in the evenings, the bed too large and cold at night. But she was not alone. Her children surrounded her with love and support. William and Emily moved into the main house to be with her, and Rose came from California and stayed for 2 months. James visited every day, bringing books and conversation. Slowly, Katherine learned to live with the grief. She found comfort in her grandchildren, in continuing the work she and Samuel had started, in tending the garden they had planted together. She would sit on the porch in the evenings and feel his presence beside her, a whisper in the wind, a warmth in the fading light. Katherine lived for another 15 years after Samuel's death. She saw her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. She saw the ranch continue to thrive under William's management, adapting to new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values she and Samuel had instilled. She saw Rose become one of the most respected nurses in San Francisco, and James published a collection of stories about frontier life that became widely popular. As she aged, Katherine's mind remained sharp, though her body gradually weakened. She told her stories to anyone who would listen, wanting to preserve the history of how the ranch came to be, how a mail-order bride from Boston and a lonely Nevada cowboy had built something that would outlast them both. In the winter of 1930, at the age of 70, Katherine Dawson passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family she had created. She was laid to rest beside Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Nevada sky they had both loved. At her funeral, William stood and spoke about his mother with tears streaming down his weathered face. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he said. "She left everything familiar behind to start over in a place she had never seen, with a man she had never met. She could have let fear stop her. She could have let the injustice she suffered break her. But instead, she chose courage. She chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. This ranch, this family, all of us standing here today, we exist because she had the courage to step off that train and believe my father when he said she was home." The Dawson Ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from William to his children, and then to theirs. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remained at its core. The porch where Samuel and Katherine had spent so many evenings together was preserved and maintained, considered sacred ground by their descendants. The story of how the ranch began, of the mail-order bride who stepped off the train alone and terrified, and the waiting cowboy who whispered, "You are home," became family legend. It was told and retold, embellished and cherished, a reminder of the power of courage and trust and love. Katherine's journal, the leather-bound book Samuel had given her after their wedding, was preserved and eventually donated to the Nevada Historical Society. In it, she had documented her journey west, her first impressions of the ranch, her growing love for Samuel, and the life they had built together. Historians would later cite it as a valuable first-hand account of frontier life from a woman's perspective. But to the Dawson family, it was simply Katherine's gift, her way of ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. In the journal's final entry, written less than a week before her death, Katherine had penned these words: "I am an old woman now, nearing the end of my journey. When I look back on my life, I see two distinct halves, the years before I came to Nevada and the years after. The before was small and constrained, full of fear and injustice. But the after, oh, the after was vast and beautiful, full of love and purpose and joy. When Samuel told me I was home that first day, I did not believe him. How could I? Home had always been a place of pain and disappointment. But he was patient and he was kind, and slowly I learned that home is not a place you come from. It is a place you build with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to walk beside you anyway. We built a good home, Samuel and I. We built it with hard work and honest communication and deep, abiding love. And even though he is gone now and I will soon follow, I know that what we built will last. It will last in our children and grandchildren. It will last in this ranch and the land we tended. It will last in the love story we lived. A story that proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust a stranger who promises you home." If anyone reads these words in years to come, I hope they take away this lesson. Do not let fear or past hurt stop you from reaching for the life you deserve. Take the chance. Board the train. Trust the promise. Choose courage over comfort. Because on the other side of that fear might just be everything you never knew you were looking for. And so the legacy of Katherine and Samuel Dawson lived on, a testament to the transforming power of love, the strength found in vulnerability, and the miracle that can happen when one person looks at another and says with complete sincerity, "You are home."